Every day, Ameren, Illinois works to deliver reliable energy throughout the state to on-the-go families, in-the-know grandparents, and busy students. But did you know we also have ways to manage your energy? Paperless billing, outage notifications, pick a due date, auto pay, and so much more. So no matter who you are or how you use your energy, there's an option that's right for you. Learn more at amerenillinois.com/options.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Huddle Up with Howard. Mike Claiborne, along with Howard Richards. And Howard, a lot of things to cover. But let's start off with the biggest story of the week, and that's the passing of John Madden.
You know, John Madden meant so much to the game of football. To me, not only what he accomplished as a coach, which a lot of people don't remember, and I think, you know, he won his only Super Bowl, I think, at the age of 41, 42 years old, then walked away from the game and became a broadcaster. And probably to this day, people still consider him among the best. What he did was he enabled the regular viewer to kind of watch football from a comedic stance, because he brought that little comic edge to the game, but he broke it down in simple terms. You know, he made all the noises like, ooh, ah, boom. And it humanized the game for a lot of people. And I think he also brought a lot of females to the game. So his work, to me, beyond just being a coach and all the other things that he's able to accomplish, you know, the whole Madden video games, I think he was absolutely a pioneer in this game. And listen, I have tremendous respect for what he did. I remember when he was broadcasting with CBS with Pat Summerall.
You saw him a lot.
I did. Saw him coming to practice. And, you know, he was a massive figure. He was a big man, former offensive lineman, of course, right. Which, you know, much respect for that. He would come in, he'd have a cigar. And the thing I remember about him most in that element, he'd always be wearing like tennis shoes, and they would never be tied up. And so that was that era when kids would walk around with their shoes untied. And I thought either his feet were too big or swollen, or he was just the coolest broadcaster there was.
He just didn't care.
No, didn't care. Didn't care. And, you know, there's a lot of funny things. You know, the guy, he was afraid to fly. But I just think, meant so much to the game and popularized it, and will forever be memorialized as one of the greats that was involved in the National Football League.
You know, when you think back, has there been one person that's had more of an impact on the game in the last 50 years than John Madden? You mentioned his coaching. You mentioned him teaching the game to so many people, and also being a pitch man. I mean, everything he touched turned to gold. You know, he was a guy who didn't fail in many things. And his timing, I thought, was always impeccable. He knew when it was time to walk away from football. He knew when it was time to switch networks. He knew when it was time to do this commercial and maybe not that one. Just a guy that I think when you look back, his footprint, and it's a big one, is one the NFL will certainly appreciate and what he's meant over the last 50 years.
No, you could always expect everyone to be glued into a game that he'd be broadcasting. Even if it was a boring game, he made it entertaining beyond what you saw in football. People turned in to watch him. I mean, comedians have emulated him over the years, and he's just one of those figures. To me, he's an icon in Americana, beyond just being a football icon.
You know, here's the one thing that I appreciated, and I met him a couple of times. He made being a lineman cool. Pick either side of the line of scrimmage. I mean, you know, being a former lineman, but showing line play and what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. And you think about all the linemen that he knew if you made a good block or you were stuffing the run. He and Leon Lett had a pretty good relationship. He really loved him some Leon Lett for all the right reasons. But even before Leon, there were so many linemen that he knew on a personal basis that he had no problem highlighting compared to the backs and receivers that were the easiest guys on the field to find. I really thought he gave linemen the credibility and certainly the exposure that they deserve.
Well, and as a lineman himself, he would draw up so much, highlighting the importance of line play for people to understand it, where most people that were commentators, color analysts, were probably never linemen outside of one of his successors in the game, Dan Deerdorf. But many of the others, former quarterbacks, receivers, what have you. He was that guy to me that as you mentioned, gave linemen their just due, their publicity. You're talking about guys scoring touchdowns, running the ball in, from Fridge Perry until all the guys that he made that cool.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, he was just a joy to see and watch. And I mean, you have heard others try to sort of, we'll say, emulate him directly, but others have sort of adapted the humorous, the sounds, the sound effects that John Madden really was the first to implement in broadcasts. And it's just never quite been the same. There will never be another John Madden.
I agree. And we've had a lot of them that have tried. But I remember my first encounter. I spotted for him and Jack Buck in a game. And just
pretty impressive.
Yeah. You know what, man? Again, you show up, you shut up, and you'll be amazed at how much you learn. You'll be one of the smartest people in the room when it's all said and done. And I think it was like he was really nice, but I think it was like halftime. We had a minute and we just started talking about line play. And he said, "Hey, have you been watching number 68?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, the reason why they can't make that play is because he was pulling and his first move was standing up instead of staying down. He said, "Holy shit, I thought I was the only guy who noticed that." And from that point on, he was so gracious. He had just written his first book, Two Left Shoes Equal 1 Yard or something like that. Because it was, he always felt if the official spotted the ball with his left foot, then your chances of having a first down were going to be closer. And he had all these little idiosyncrasies about him. But man, what a fascinating guy. And it's unfortunate that Fox just aired that great documentary on him, and a week later or less than a week later, he's no longer with us.
Timing is everything. One thing to highlight, especially for those that listen in the St. Louis area, which also, to me, sort of further boosts the profile and the fact that Don Coryell is deserving to be in the Hall of Fame. John Madden, one of the best to ever do it, also learned under Don Coryell at San Diego State.
Mm-hmm.
You think of all the great coaches, Joe Gibbs, Jim Hannafin, Ernie Zampese, and others. It goes on. And then John Madden. So why then is Don Coryell not there?
I agree.
I think, listen, I like the fact that they had the Legends class in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They combined them this year because of COVID last year. So they combined those Legends classes of 2020, 2021. I think it's something that they should do every year. There are a lot of deserving former players that, because of the rules and the way selections are made, won't get that look unless there is the Legends class.
I think they need to take it one step further. I think position coaches should start be recognized a little bit more. I mean, you played for a lot of coaches. You probably knew your position coach more than you knew the head coach.
Yeah,
and
no
when
doubt.
you think about the tree that Jim Hannafin had, and there's some other guys, Ernie Starkner on defense. I mean, there's so many guys
Gene
who
Stallings.
had so much impact on the game, but they weren't head coaches. But man, you know what? They were lifers as assistants, and they made so many guys. And I'm sure when guys start talking about when they go in the Hall of Fame, they'll remember their position coach more than they'll remember their head coach. And I really think the NFL needs to take a step back and truly understand the impact that assistant coaches have on this game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, two other names that we didn't talk about, but that I had the good fortune to know as assistant coaches on the Cowboys staff, Jerry Tubbs, who coached the linebackers. Coach Tubbs, Hollywood Henderson, Chuck Howley,
Leroy Jordan.
Lewis, Leroy Jordan. Come on. That's a guy that certainly, and he played himself. We mentioned Gene Stallings, even Dick Nolan, who split time coaching defensive backs with Gene Stallings. Everson Walls, who's a guy that, to me, especially if you have a Legends class, his record has stood.
Got to be there
4 years until Trayvon Diggs tied it just this last week against
but here's the deal.
Redskins.
The all-time greatest record, which will never be broken, is the one Dick Night Train Lane owns.
Well, that's true.
And to me, and I didn't see a lot of him. As a matter of fact, I didn't see much of him, but he was somebody that I tried to learn as much about. I don't know if there's ever been a better corner. When you think about size, strength, and speed, they outlawed the neck tackle thanks to him. And I'll tell you a quick story. Bill Parcells, we would sit in spring training, we talked, and it's him, Ron Wolf, and myself sitting in a little box watching the game.
Ron Wolf, the former NFL
the former general manager for the Green Bay Packers, longtime scout with the Raiders, broke in with Al Davis. So we're talking about defensive backs, great defensive backs. And they're naming Lim Barney and some of these. I said, hey, what about Night Train? Parcells leans back in his chair and he was like, holy.
How do you know about Night Train?
He said, let me tell you something. He said, I was a rookie out of Wichita State as a linebacker in Detroit. He said, back then they used to time you. They used to time you in training camp. He said Night Train was 36 years old and ran like a sub 440. And everybody kind of looked around at each other and said, oh, that's Night Train. He was 36 years old. And he was still putting them down. But I think when you think about the cover ability, the physicality that he brought to the game, and the fact that, remember, they weren't throwing on every down like they throw now.
Right.
And at that time, they would throw at you, and they didn't care who you were. So maybe Night Train didn't have that many balls thrown at him during the course of the day because A, they didn't throw it a lot, and B, maybe they were scared of him. But to have 12 of them, it was a 14 and a 12 game season, man, that's never going to be broken.
It will be a stretch, even with the amount of passes that are thrown in games. I mean, just look how long it's taken someone to even get to 11. And the next closest guy, I think, was Everson had 9 a few years later, I think in 83, 85. And
well, he should
Lester
be in.
Hayes. And then Lester Hayes, I think, had
There's
9
another guy.
too. Yeah.
I think those two should be in because nobody wanted to go up against him. Lester Hayes he's kind of like Night Train. He's a big guy. He's 6'3" himself, 210, 215 pounds. And Everson Walls was not a small guy either. And they could press. Back then you could get assaulted going down the field. I mean, the way they play the game now, I mean, if you exhale on a guy, they may throw a flag on you. Back then, it was hand-to-hand combat, which made those receivers tough also. But I really agree with you. I think both those guys should get more consideration, and along with Coryell. Now, the problem is they don't have a champion. They don't have somebody champion their cause because so many people have moved on in front of them. And that's what's wrong with this whole Hall of Fame ballot committee. They need to either open it up or be able to present more people who aren't here. Maybe there's one person who should be responsible for people who are no longer with us.
And I think we know one guy. He lives out in Arizona now. That would do a fantastic change. We're talking about Howard Balzer.
There's no doubt. Yeah. I mean, Howard's been responsible for a lot of people getting in the Hall of Fame, but Coryell should definitely be in for all he's done. And, other than Sid Gilman, nobody had more of an impact on the passing game than Don Coryell, period.
I agree. At the collegiate level and, of course, at the NFL level. And, to me, a lot of these Hall of Fame candidates are penalized really for one reason, whether or not they got to a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's unfair because we know football is the ultimate team sport. And in addition to that one guy, you've got 11 others. And you could really make a valid argument that regardless of how well a team did, if you take that one player away, Super Bowl or not, how well would those teams have done? How much better would they have fared? How much worse would they have fared without his presence? So I think the ultimate measurement stick, especially for quarterbacks, is if they've gotten to a Super Bowl and won one, which I think in a lot of ways is unfair.
No, I agree. I don't think your career should be predicated on one game.
No.
Too many things can happen in a game that you weren't directly responsible for.
That's right.
So I think I've always taken the Super Bowl off the table because I've kind of got my own list of guys who should be in, and some of them have won Super Bowls. I'm gonna throw one more at you, and then we'll take a break. Why isn't Roger Craig in the Pro Football Hall of Fame? 3-time Super Bowl champion, the first thousand guy, and tough as barbed wire, and had the numbers to prove it. I don't know. And again, a guy that nobody's out there championing his cause. He's not on a pregame show. He's not an analyst. And it seems like it's out of sight, out of mind. But I bet if you and I sat here, we could probably come up with a half a dozen, what do you think, 10 guys that probably should be in?
Easily. Yeah.
You know, I was almost done with the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame when Charles Haley kept getting left at the door. I know he might have had some issues. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and dispute that. But
shouldn't be based on that. It should be based on what he does on the field.
Yeah. And what he did on the field, he found himself on how many Super Bowl teams? He found himself as being one of the top sack guys and could play the run. Yeah, it created a defense for him. You know, where he could be a stand-up guy, he could put his hand on the ground. I mean, he was a guy that was he's kind of what Michael Parsons is now.
Yeah.
You know?
No doubt.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back more. We'll huddle up with Howard after this.
Every day, Ameren, Illinois works.
At St. Louis Acura, our customer-focused approach keeps earning us more inventory. As others increase their fees and take advantage of limited inventory, we keep our prices low because we remain committed to becoming better than ever and treating you as we want to be treated. We want you coming back and sending your friends and family to a veteran-owned, family-based business you can trust. Blessings for a wonderful holiday season and a prosperous new year from our families to yours. St. Louis Acura, better than ever for you.
Back with Huddle Up with Howard. He's Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne. And let's talk a little bit about the NFL. We're winding things down. We've seen some teams get on a hot streak, and we've seen some teams that just flat out stunk up the joint. And I'll ask you this right off the bat. We've seen some teams melt down. Did we see any coaches other than, I think, Nagy in Chicago? I don't think that was going to work from the outset. But, you know, when you have so many injuries and COVID impacting your lineup on every Sunday, is that warrant? Do we see a coach getting fired because of what's going on this season?
Well, I am not so sure if you count just COVID. There are probably some other issues that you can roll in there if you're talking about a certain number of guys that you could use that excuse. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have the answer to that question. But there will be some changes, as there always are. You got to look at. I mean, here's one that to me probably shouldn't happen, but it's something that they may look at, even in Washington with Ron Rivera, because they seemingly they've had a rash of injuries. They've had COVID. They have not been able to find a quarterback long term. That's a process. You don't really have that patience anymore that you used to have. There's so much speculation. Is Taylor Heineke the guy? Well,
hell no.
Those aren't my questions. But I'm just saying that these are the types of questions, the things that, that organization, their fan base, that's all they're talking about. So what do they do? Because clearly, if you saw the last week's game, Dallas versus Washington, you can see Heineke wasn't the first. I think his first throw of the game, he threw a pick.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to recognize that if you've got a cornerback who has pinned a receiver to the inside, you got to be able to see that before that ball flies. And it was just, if he was a receiver, Diggs, which he once was at Alabama, perfect position to catch that ball. But he did a great job of pinning that receiver, and the receiver had no chance. As a quarterback, you got to be able to recognize that right away, much sooner than he did.
You know what, though? I think you have certain quarterbacks, and I think Kurt Warner started something. Kurt Warner trusted his receivers so much, he threw to a spot on the field.
Well, and he had some exceptional receivers.
That's my point.
Yes.
And I think that when you have these other guys say, hey, just throw it to the spot and he'll be there. Well, you know what? Everybody's not Isaac Bruce or Torrey Holt or some of the other great receivers he threw to. And, corner might jump a guy. And there's so many things that happen, which is why you have to watch the game. Don't have the tunnel vision of saying, I'm just going to throw to the hash mark or I'm going to throw to the number. You got to pay attention to what's going on. And that's one of the things that makes Brady so good. He can look you off. He can still find a spot and he'll throw it and he'll trust you to get there just like you trust him to catch it. And everybody can't do it. But I think Kurt Warner kind of started that. And we've seen now a progression of quarterbacks who throw in the spots and you say, what was he looking at? Well, he wasn't looking. He knew that's where he was supposed to be and he was going to throw it and he washed his hands of it. Here comes a pick six the other way. And now we got all kind of problems going on.
Yeah. And so much of that is developed even outside of the game plans. And it's developed from week to week, from personnel to personnel. What you do against Team A in week 15 is not necessarily what you did in week 14 or what you will do in week 16, because it's predicated on the tendencies of that particular player. So you may be able to throw to that spot in week 14. Week 16, you can't do that. That receiver may have to run a comeback because that cover guy is so much better. Or that ball, that cover guy may be susceptible to back shoulder throws. So you run that deep route and boom, you stop. And you know that shoulder is going to be on the sideline at your back shoulder because this particular defender doesn't know how to recover for that. And that's why I think so much is worked on, so much is emphasized on working before practice and after practice, watching film together and looking for those certain things that can give you an advantage even throughout your practice week.
No, I agree with you. And that's why the off-field bonding is so important because you got to be on the same page. You have to.
Yeah.
And it's something that we sometimes take for granted. And, you don't notice it until it doesn't start working. And then you say, well, they got to be better communicators. And I know when guys work out with each other in the off season or whatever, this is more than just down and out. Hey, you go down here and I'll throw it to you. We'll work on that. No, you got to work on the process of how you get there, what to look for. Certain guys. And now with the availability of film, Howard, they know everything a guy can do and what he can't do. And the good quarterbacks will take that film with him to show quarterbacks, hey, these are the guys we're going to be playing this year. Get used to him doing this or get him used to him doing that. And when the game rolls around, it'll be just like playing down and out because we'll have the advantage. I mean, technology has made it almost foolproof for a guy not to be prepared. Unlike the days of film and before that rumor, you have too many resources at your, fingertip to make sure that you're better prepared to be able to defeat your opponent. All right, so we've got all these teams that are fighting for playoff spots. The divisions have been clinched, so now we're talking about wild cards and playoff positions. I don't know if adding a team or two teams was a good thing because I don't know if there are that many teams that are that good right now.
Well, you're probably right. If you're I'm just looking at the NFC, so the top 7 teams are, Green Bay, Dallas, LA Rams, Tampa Bay, Arizona, San Francisco. Philly is number 17 at a record of 8-7. The next team in is the Vikings. So they're obviously waiting for something to happen. But will that happen? Who knows? Over in the AFC, the 7th team is the Dolphins, who have had an amazing season, given the fact that they started 1-7. So they've now won 7 straight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's amazing. But that's a team that is peaking and they're playing very well right now. Wouldn't be surprised to see them hold on to that spot. The next team behind the Dolphins is, guess who? The Ravens. And obviously their quarterback has been out for a couple of weeks and they are trending downward. They lost 2 games by going for 2 and of course missed on both those opportunities. So that contributes to their 8-7 record. Otherwise they'd be 10-5, at least 10-5 right now.
I didn't have a problem with either one of those conversions. One, because he was short on defensive backs. He couldn't afford to take it into overtime.
Right.
The second one, they just needed it, and I guess some would say, well, you got the best kicker in the world, and, you should have used him. Well, sometimes it's not about the kicker. You have to make a statement about your football team. I think they go as far as Lamar Jackson can take them. Defensively, they got chewed up pretty good last week. But, I think overall they're a pretty good ball club. But, the question is, okay, if they get in, can they beat anybody?
What are they going to do?
Yeah. And so, but I always say, if you're fighting for your life in the last 2 weeks of the season, you should already be in postseason mode. You should already be playing like you're a playoff team fighting for your life, because there is no tomorrow. I mean, you lose, you're going home. So it's going to be fun to watch down the stretch. I'll run this by you and then we'll switch to college. Who's the MVP?
Well, you got to consider Aaron Rodgers, got to consider Brady, got to consider Mahomes. But there's some other players out there as well. That running back at Indy,
Jonathan Taylor.
I mean, he's having a tremendous year. I'm trying to think of the receiver at Jalen Waddle, rookie out of Alabama,
and Cooper Kupp.
And Cooper Kupp is having a fantastic year. Right?
I'm gonna give you a couple. I'm gonna give you another name. They'll give him defensive rookie of the year, but Micah Parsons.
Oh, no doubt.
He should be in the conversation.
He should be both.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. Yeah. I'm going to eliminate Rodgers because he didn't play the whole season. And while some won't make it a bearing, the way he just lied to everybody about being vaccinated in a time where it's been so serious.
Well, and people will say, well, it shouldn't matter. Well,
it does matter.
This matters. In this particular issue, this should matter.
Yeah.
I do believe, because it really speaks just beyond your character as a player. You're now talking about the integrity of the game also. And that to me is a non-starter and should matter when it comes down to, in this case, voting or not voting for him as an MVP.
I just hope they don't turn this into a popularity contest. I could realistically give it to Brady and not think twice about it because of the season that he's had. I think the fact that they kept the band together has been a plus. How many times have we seen a team go one season too long with a bunch of guys? Other than injury, they've gotten some pretty good mileage out of all those guys. And this will be the last time they'll be together because they'll move on from here. But Brady would be a guy. But I think Jonathan Taylor probably has been the most consistent guy. He's been better than the quarterback he's playing with. And I think he's the only reason why the Colts find themselves in the situation that they're in. Now with Carson Wentz going down, it'll be really interesting to see how much they rely on him at this point. But I just say to everybody, stay tuned. All right, before we get out of here, let's talk some college football. We've had some games canceled because of COVID. It's funny because in just reading a couple of people's work, some people seem to think, and especially Hawaii, that they pull out of their own backyard game because they said it was COVID, but they also had 9 transfers that went in the portal and 4 were starters. How much of an impact do you think the portal issue is having with some schools, and they mesh it with COVID? How much of an impact do you think that's having on the bowl games and for the future bowl games?
It is something that should absolutely be considered, even though it's probably not talked about nearly as much. But if you can't field a team that's going to be competitive, guess what? It's easier to pull out and make an excuse than to have to go through that game and possibly get embarrassed. Maybe in some cases finish the season with a loss, a bad loss, or a loss that that puts you with a losing record. So those are things that, listen, if coaching staffs and athletic administrations deny it, then they're not necessarily being honest. And that's the way I look at it.
What about the athlete now today who is going to turn pro and says, you know what? I'm going to prepare for the draft. I'm not playing this last game. Now, we saw with Mizzou where Coach Drinkwitz made the decision he didn't want to play Beatty. I'm sure Beatty had some say-so in it as well. But what about some of those guys that are playing in what I would deem bigger bowl games that have decided, you know what? I'm out. Good luck. Hope you guys do well. I don't need a swag bag. I'm going to get ready for the NFL.
There's two schools of thought on that. I talked to a scout today. He didn't want to be identified, but essentially what he said was there are some guys that, especially if you're playing in a bowl game that essentially is meaningless. In other words, a non-playoff game. A lot of those guys don't have anything to prove. He's okay with a guy sitting out, making that decision. You know, we did address the Tyler Beatty thing, and I had provided him some information about Beatty statistically that he wasn't quite aware of. I mean, he knew he's a great player, but I talked about, hey, he led the SEC in rushing. He had over 50 catches. Oh, and he blocks very well.
Yes.
And he's an academic All-American. So you've got a guy that's doing it on the field, but also has the thinking capacity, the football IQ, that he's not going to be lost when you throw a new playbook at him. He's going to pick it up and then be able to adjust and adapt in really any offensive system that he gets into. Not a lot of guys can do that, which I think is something that will help Tyler Beatty's draft stock. And we all know he wanted to play. It was coach's decision. And let me add one other thing about that a lot of people don't know, because I know the Missouri fan base was all up in arms about this. What happened to, coach giving, having the best players in there wanting to win? Well, Drinkwitz has in his contract a clause that extends his contract by 1 year for every bowl win, on top of getting a check for $100,000. So for someone to say he doesn't care, or, he was, you got to look at this differently. He could have easily, said, hey, I want to get that extension. I want the money. I'll sacrifice Beatty. We got one more game out of him. I'll play him. I want to win this game for selfish reasons. He didn't do that. And I think that speaks volumes to how he is, how he thinks of his players. And I think that helps you long-term in recruiting. And I would make sure people understood that, if I were a recruiter. Because you could say, hey, this guy over here, you can go play for him. Does he really care about you?
Yeah,
not like I will. And here's
exactly.
why. Yeah. So there's that, but that's not necessarily the norm. That's the exception. But there are a lot of guys, I think, that selfishly take them out of these games that, in essence, you could consider them quitting on their teams when their teams need their presence to at least not only make it competitive, but possibly win those games. And there are a number of guys that have made the decision to not play in these games that should play if they're thinking of going to the NFL, because these games matter in competitive games, postseason games. And then there will be those games, the All-Star games, the Senior Bowl, the Hula Bowl, the Shrine Game, but especially the Senior Bowl when you're being coached by an NFL staff. They want to see how you're going to adjust and adapt with pro coaching.
Well, and I throw this into the equation too. When you're playing in some of the higher bowl games, scouts want to see you playing against teams that have other good players across the line of scrimmage.
That's the best measurement stick that they have before they can draft you. Absolutely.
Because Tyler Beatty doesn't prove anything by playing against Army, because it's not a guy that's going to playing on Army that's going to be in the NFL in 5 years. Okay. Mm-hmm. After he does his tour of service, that guy's not there. So he has nothing to prove. Now, if you're a guy at Ohio State, or, if you're a guy at Michigan and you're playing against Georgia or somebody like that, well, you know what, man, this is going to help if you do well. But, playing against Army or some of these other lesser rands who won't field a guy that will play in the pros, I don't think it proves anything, and I certainly accept it, and I understand it, so I'm not really upset about it. Yeah. All right, before we get out of here, bowl games coming up this weekend. We can talk about all those other ones over a glass of wine. Let's talk about the two games that have the most importance: Michigan, Georgia, Cincinnati, and Alabama. I'll start with Cincinnati, Alabama. I can't wait to see the matchup with Gardner going up against Jamison Williams. Gardner, I watched him play. You know who's on that team? Is E.J. Jr.'s kid.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, he's on that team. They're not a bad team. The question is, have they seen this kind of competition, this kind of talent before? And the answer is no.
No, they haven't.
They haven't. So how they weather the storm, I think, is going to be very important. I like Alabama. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to beat them like it was Notre Dame, but they could. They could. You know, when Notre Dame gets in the playoffs, they get waxed. Cincinnati might be in that situation. If Cincinnati doesn't do something early and don't allow themselves to get worn down, it could be an interesting 3 quarters, and then talent takes over in the 4th.
Well, the thing, playing against Alabama from a team like Cincinnati that has not seen that type of competition, the one thing they must do is figure out a way to protect the football. And you've got to be on offense. You've got to be able to really chew up clock, minimize the possessions that you give to Bryce Young and Jamison Williams and the rest of the players, complement of players that they have on offense, because they're that good. They may not have played their best season this year.
They played it when they needed to, though.
And that's what matters. You know, that's what matters. That's why they are where they are, you know, irrespective of the loss that they've had. I would never bet against them simply because of Saban and his staff and how well they prepare their players. You know, the thing about Alabama that I love, and I'm going to be at that game on Friday afternoon, I'm going to get there early because I want to see them warm up.
Yeah.
That to me is as much as it tells a lot about them.
I agree,
because it's a sight to behold when you see this team warming up. They're very serious about it. You get to see actual techniques in pregame warmups that these guys are using, especially their defensive line. I love watching them in warmups because they are doing those things. They're not just going through these silly drills. They're doing things that will be applicable during those 4 quarters. And listen, whether you like Alabama or not, you've got to respect what Nick Saban has built and how well he has done as a college football coach. He's the best that's ever done it.
Best that's ever done it for this reason. Every year he's got new coaches. You know, there's some guys who've had great success because they kept their staff together. Nick is going to lose an offensive D coordinator, a defensive coordinator, somebody else along the way every year.
They're knocking on his door because they
Exactly.
want to be associated with Nick. That elevates their sense. Oh, yeah, by the way, you coach with Nick Saban.
Yeah. Yeah, I was there for a little while. Yeah,
Exactly.
So, all right, Michigan, Georgia, 2 teams that have been around for a long time that for some reason haven't played each other. And I'm a little surprised that the Big Ten and the SEC haven't found a way to get together. 2 of the most storied conferences in the country that have not played each other maybe as much with regularity as maybe they should.
I agree. And I would love to see, because widely those are 2 of the conferences that are considered the best. I would like to see, you know, maybe every SEC team play a Big Ten team in their preseason rotation, you know, to get away from the blood donors, right? Now, I think you really solidify your status as a premier conference because you're getting that experience playing against top tier teams. Will we see that? Don't know. But if you really want to make viewing college football, especially those teams at the top, you find a way to get that done.
So here's what you do. First of all, you secede from the NCAA, the Power 5 conferences, set your own rules and standards, and maybe a 2-loss team can go further because you know what? There's not going to be that many Saturdays off. You'll still have a blood donor, or here's what my 3 non-conference games. Regional opponent like Missouri, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, comparable conference opponent. Whoever finished in 4th place in the SEC will play the 4th place team in the Big Ten. And the 3rd one would be a reasonable alleged blood donor where it could be interesting. Or maybe you say we're going to play a team within the state. So maybe you knock on Southeast Missouri's door Missouri State. It's going to be a bloodletting, but bottom line is that money stays within the state. But to bring in somebody to have their head chopped off that nobody's heard of, like this year, was it Central Michigan, Western Michigan? I don't know. I can't remember.
Central
But
Michigan.
who cares about Central Michigan? Nobody knows anything about it. And, Missouri's not the only school that does it. But if you have those 3 games, you're going to ensure fan interest, you're going to ensure TV money, and you're going to ensure the fact of saying we play the best. We don't duck anybody. We're playing one of the best conferences. And from a coaching standpoint, a recruiting standpoint, that's got to take you to the next level.
Yeah, and I think you also prepare yourself better for your conference schedule.
Absolutely.
That early competition. That's why, in the 70s, the teams that I played on at Mizzou, we were prepared for the gauntlet of the Big 8 schedule. But we're playing Alabama. We're playing Penn State. We're playing those tough teams that, are going to challenge you. And you've got to be at your best in order to be prepared so that you don't get blown out. So I don't know if we'll get to that point. I know there's talk of it. I know Saban would like to see it. But a lot of these games just don't make sense. I mean, the year Missouri played Eastern Michigan, they had to shorten the quarters from 15 to 10. And then he had to convince the coach because he was so stubborn about doing so. It's like, really,
dude, this is for you.
Avoid further embarrassment, but also you don't want to get your players hurt.
That's
you still got
exactly
a long
right.
Season.
Exactly.
So those games should not be scheduled ever. That's what I think. So
all right,
we're on the same page there.
Well, we seem to be on the same page about a few things, which means that we're smarter than most people who are watching this. So that's a good thing.
Amen.
Hey, listen, man, have a great new year. Enjoy the playoffs in Dallas and all the other things that come with it. And we'll do this again on the other side of 2021 and 2022. So stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk soon.
Happy New Year, my friend. Toast to you, and cheers to a healthy, prosperous, safe 2022. We'll see you next year.
The only thing faster than this supersonic golf cart are the closing times at thehomeloanexpert.com. Mortgage rates on the 2s, and we have a 21-day closing guarantee. Apply online today at thehomeloanexpert.com.